Hey everyone, Gaijin here. So, yeah, October's here, my break's finally over, I'm feeling a lot better, and yeah, I upgraded while I was gone, so now I'm all here in this wonderful 60 FPS universe. Thankfully I was able to pick up a Sony ZV-1, which has been a superbly good camera. So yeah, let's get into it. So during my break, while I was sitting around playing too many games and wondering why I wasn't working, trying to let my body figure out what it meant to not work, I decided to sit down with a movie that really influenced me into this path of understanding everything about Japan, The Last Samurai. Because yeah, back then, this was a movie that really helped me solidify my interest in Japan. And not just me, a whole bunch of other people, and oh man, this movie came out in 2003. And how much did I love this movie when I was 19, you might be asking?
You will need this.
What does it say?
Yeah, I was one of those kind of kids. Now, one of the big reasons I decided to go back and watch this movie all over again all these years later was because I've been seeing a ton of like reviews and opinion pieces over on YouTube. You know, despite the fact that this movie is almost 20 years old, people are still talking about it. And to be honest, most of the time it's being talked about in not really the best light. And look gang, I get it. This is not an extremely accurate documentary historical movie, alright? I understand that there's inaccuracies all over the place. I understand that this is supposed to be taking place during the Satsuma Rebellion. I understand that Katsumoto is actually supposed to be Saigo Takamori. I know that Nathan Algren is not supposed to be American, but French. I understand that the Imperial Army was not a bunch of conscripts who'd never hold a gun before, but actually hardened soldiers who actually knew how to fight because they won the Boshin War about 9-10 years prior to the events of this movie. And I absolutely know that Saigo Takamori, aka Katsumoto, didn't see guns as dishonorable because samurai had been using guns since 1543. And of course the katana is not the soul of the samurai. It's a status symbol, sure, and a samurai during the Edo period wouldn't have been caught dead without it, but if anything, it was actually the blacksmith who put their soul into the sword, which is why they would typically wear white when they were forging, just like you see in this movie, as well as shide being strung around their workplace. It was all for Shinto-like purity. And if you really want some good examples of that, check out the story of Masamune and Muramasa to prove the point. And yes, I know that there was that ninja attack in the middle of Act 2, and ninja haven't been relevant in Japan since the mid-1600s. I mean, the last remnants of organized shinobi, the Yakunin Gumi, were actually disbanded 10 years prior to the events of this movie. And I don't know about you, but this movie paints Emperor Meiji as kind of this weak, sort of vassalistic kind of character. And I like to think that the Meiji of actual history had way more ambition and power than this movie lets on. I'm pretty sure that this guy would not let a whole bunch of council members just completely walk all over him. And I mean, even the seppuku was wrong at the end of Act 1. Yeah, the head is not supposed to be rolling off the body and on the ground everywhere. No. The Kaishakunin was supposed to leave a small amount of skin left on the neck because to let the head roll was considered extremely disrespectful. Look, I get all that, but I'm here to tell you that in my humble opinion, and it is just my humble opinion, this is not a movie about a white savior like a lot of the harsh critics are saying, and it's definitely not some kind of historical documentary movie. This movie, at least a large chunk of it, because I know there are multiple themes in this movie, is really about how Americans and Japanese interact with each other and how they're changed by each other's perspective and culture. When you really think about it, it's almost like a documentary of what to expect when these two particular nations come together and try to communicate. And I mean, you can kind of see this theme as early as Act 1. Like at the 6-minute 30-second mark, you've got this character, Colonel Bugley, who's supposed to represent the American military, right? He has this to say about Japan.
Nathan Algren, I'd like you to meet Mr. Omura from Japan and his associate, whose name I've given up trying to pronounce. Japan's got it in mind to become a civilized country.
Now you might think, oh, this is just good old-fashioned American ethnocentrism. But no, this happens not more than a moment later. So yeah, it's not just Colonel Bugley, but also Omura, who looks down on, well, each other. And it's kind of interesting because while this is a worst case scenario, this really does set up the idea that a lot of people who know nothing about each other's culture, when they get together, they'll typically look down upon each other. I've seen this happen on multiple occasions when it came to Western foreigners and Japanese. Not all the time, but it did happen. And yeah, that's kind of the tragic thing, is that this sort of mentality has still stuck with us as a civilization. And I've seen this exact scene play out multiple times even to this day. And then about 12 minutes later, we run into this character, Simon Graham. And boy howdy, going back and watching this movie, 10 years into my career, I have never related more to a fictional character. But anyway, he had something very, very interesting to say when he was introducing himself and talking with Nathan Algren for the first time. Listen to this.
I was too relieved of my position. I had a rather unfortunate tendency to tell the truth in a country where no one ever says what they mean. So now, I very accurately translate other people's lies.
Now, we're going to get to more detail of this later because there are plenty of examples of this in this movie, but this really is the one communicative thing, if that's even a word, that particularly Americans have to watch out for when it comes to trying to interact with, people in Japan, is that, yeah, so much of Japanese society, they do kind of little white lie to each other in order to keep this idea of harmony. It's this concept that I've talked about multiple times on this channel called tatemae and hone, and we'll get into these really hardcore later on this movie. But the thing that Graham's trying to express here is that from a Western perspective, we are usually pretty honest. We wear our truth on our sleeves because that's just kind of how we are. We're a very open society. Japan? Not so much. They hold on to hone pretty deep, and they don't really show that to a whole heck of a lot of people. And it's not that it's a bad thing, it's just kind of how it is. But it's something that we as foreigners kind of have to keep an eye and ear out for. But no, the real meat of this theme starts at Act 2, 30 minutes in. We've got this character, Nobutada, who is Katsumoto's son and the head of the village, right? Well, in response to capturing Nathan Algren a little while back, he has this to say.
Jolly good.
Now, I know this was supposed to be played off for laughs, and yes, I did chuckle even when I went back and watched this years and years later. But what's really interesting is that this one small gesture reminded me of some of the earlier times when I was really trying to, well, just interact with people in Japan. There is this thing that happens a lot, and it's usually only done by kids, but sometimes I've seen adults do it. Well, they'll kind of dare each other to go up to a foreigner and just like say some kind of weird greeting that they saw on social media or regular media or something like that. Like, imagine some junior high or high schooler coming up to you and like in this, the most broken English ever, being like, hey Holmes. It's this idea of Nobutada saying jolly good without really understanding the context, but he knows that it's something that they say all the time, right? It's like non-communication. You're not even trying. But anyway, that's just something that I just had flashbacks to, particularly when it came to a lot of the kids that I taught or some of the kids around the neighborhood where I lived, or even sometimes with people I visited. So shortly after that, at about the 34-minute mark, there's two particular things that happened that on the surface, it doesn't seem like much. But to me, as someone who's been doing, cultural analysis and stuff like that for the last 10 years, it's something that really spoke to me in a kind of a symbolic way. So what basically happens in the scene is that Nathan Algren, who has been captured, his wounds are tended to, and he's just kind of kept away in this little side room. He has the door closed on him twice. The first time it was with Higen, who is, if you haven't watched the movie, I know this is going to be confusing, so go watch the movie before watching the rest of this. Higen is basically the son of the samurai who Nathan Algren killed in self-defense. Like, it was war. It's to be expected. So Higen just kind of looks at him disapprovingly and closes the door on him, right? Well, not more than about a minute later, the same thing kind of happens, except this time the door is closed on Nathan through Taka, with Taka being the wife of the samurai that Nathan had just killed. Now, I understand that these two people in particular are probably really, really mad that this man that they now have to keep in their home killed both their father and their husband. But I can't help but feel like there's this sort of other hot take with these scenes. So remember that tatemae and hone that I told you about earlier? One of the things that has happened to me many times as a foreigner living in Japan is that there are some people who will metaphorically close the door on you. They will be kind to you up to a point. That's the thing about tatemae. When you first go to Japan, it may feel like, oh, everyone's treating me so nice, everyone's so polite, everyone's so cool. Live there. Be there for like a month. After about a month or two, you start to see what people actually think of you. Because that's when the hospitality dries up. Because typically when a foreigner is seen in Japan, most people there are thinking, well, they're just visiting here or they're not going to be here for very long, yada yada yada, unless you establish yourself in that community, but that's way later down in this video. People will kind of shut you out. They don't want to let you in on them. Like, the second time this happens, Nathan's actually looking into the family having a meal by themselves, right? I can't help but feel like this is symbolic of, like, the family. The family is the most inside. It's the most Naka thing that there is. And to have the door closed on him saying, you cannot be a part of this. You can never be a part of this. That kind of spoke to me. There have been so many instances where I felt like the door kind of got closed on me. There are a couple of times when I tried to join circles when I was studying abroad in college where I felt like the door was kind of being closed on me. It's like, we'll talk about it more a little bit later, but it's like this idea of I was just this unwanted guest. And then not much later, at about the 36-minute mark, Nathan's sitting here asking,
Sake?
So what happened in the scene, at least from what I can tell and what I've gathered, is that Nathan's sitting here saying one particular word in Japanese, right? And Nobutada over here is thinking, oh, well, he's just babbling words. Because not too long ago, Nobutada was babbling words at Nathan Algren with no understanding of concept of communication, right? It's the same thing happening, but kind of in reverse. But there is a brief moment where Nobutada's like, oh, wait, no. I get it. He's actually asking, like, he really needs it. Because, you know, Algren's going through alcohol withdrawal right now, and he just needs to get that fill. But it's just really interesting because for the first time between these two characters, when they would go back and forth just, like, expecting to just say words to each other, but there's no communication whatsoever, this is the first time that there's actual communication. And this happens! This really does happen. It's happened to me, I've seen it happen to other people, but at least with the case of us as Americans trying to talk to folks in Japan, we'll try and we're trying to say words, right? And to a lot of people, it's like, oh, well, that's really cute. And then there's something that clicks. It's like, wait, no, I get it. I understand. And it's a weirdly beautiful thing. I'll get more into it later, but it's like this scene just stuck out. It's a second-long scene, but God, it speaks volumes. Now, we get a couple minutes later, we're at about the 39-40-minute mark, and it's really interesting because Nathan Algren's just walking around this village, right? This village that he is technically a prisoner of war in. And what's really interesting is that the people that are coming up to him who are interested are children, right? There's two scenes where this happens. There is this group of children who are, like, staring at him, and it's not like an ew, gross kind of stare. It's very inquisitive. It's like a smiling kind of interest. Like, I can't explain it, but if you've experienced it, you know what I'm talking about. All the while, the adults are like pushing the kids back. They're like, no, don't have anything to do with this outsider, this freaking Gaijin over here. This is so real, y'all. In my time working in Japan, in my time studying, working abroad, and even just visiting, it's the kids. The kids are always the ones who are wanting to come up to you and learn about who you are. Granted, this also happens with the elderly, but I mean, considering a lot of times the elderly are not usually in the big city, it doesn't really happen that much. Kids, man. I loved dealing with kids in Japan because they don't have the ingrained prejudices. They're not taught their prejudices yet. They're not told to be wary of outsiders yet. They just see a different person and they want to know more about them. It's a very real thing. I went back and I watched the scene like 3 or 4 times, and it was amazing. It's so real. One of the best experiences I ever had living in Japan with sort of cross-cultural communication came not from adults, but from 2 kids that I had talked to at my local train station. I'd love to tell the story here, but it's kind of long-winded. But if you are even remotely thinking about going to Japan to live there for whatever reason, man, pay attention to the kids. Because the kids are the ones who really care. I think this is a universal kind of thing. My point is, it may seem strange. It might seem like that, oh, well, you're just kind of this freak show. I disagree. I really do think it's kids, particularly in Japan, it's the kids who really want to get to know you and know who you are and what you are. And by them opening themselves up to you and you open yourself back, maybe you can kind of squash some of the really bad misconceptions that get spread around foreigners in Japan. Who knows, man? But I mean, at this point, we're all still kind of making mistakes. Like at the, what was it, like the 40.5-minute mark of this movie, you see Nathan Alger just horrible muddy shoes just walking in the house, and it's like, my initial reaction is, what are you doing, man? Because even at home, you would know not to walk into someone's home with muddy boots. Like, that should be a no-brainer. But it's interesting because this really is kind of symbolic of starting to learn through, like through a trail of fire. I don't care how much culture of Japan you've studied prior to going over, you're gonna mess up. Listen to me. For those of you who have just gone to Japan through the JET program, because I know y'all left in late August, you're gonna mess up, okay? It's gonna be alright. Don't beat yourself up over it, because mistakes still happen. Mistakes still happen! This exact mistake happened with me not that long ago. A couple years back before COVID dropped, I was visiting, it was me, Aki, Tomo, and Hutch, and we were going to this castle. I was so excited, I wasn't thinking. So the Genkan, which is the place where you go in, take off your shoes, and step up like onto the house or building or whatever, it's typically like you have one floor, which is the dirty floor, and then you have the next floor up, which is the place where you're supposed to walk around socked, right? Some Genkan, they have the regular dirty floor, then they have this wood paneling thing that you're supposed to step onto, but with your shoes off, and then take your shoes, put them in like a little cubby or a locker or something like that, then you go up and get up to wherever it is you're going, right? Well, I was so excited and I wasn't paying attention. I stepped up on this platform with one foot and my shoes were still on and I wasn't thinking. I was like, I'll take them off here and then I do the step up, right? No, and then there's a curator that just bolts right after me, yelling at me, not even saying words, not saying words in English or Japanese. It's like this kind of thing. And I was mortified because it's like, I shouldn't be making rookie mistakes like that. But that's the thing, is that these mistakes happen, use them as a learning opportunity. For this movie, Nathan Algren learned not to wear your shoes inside the house. I would assume by general observation and by the fact that Nobutada was basically kicking him out of the house when this happened. Oh man, and then there's the 41-minute mark where we're introduced to Bob. No, that's not his name, it's a long-running joke in this movie, don't worry about it. But what's really interesting here is that this is the first time that Nathan actually attempts to try and use Japanese to communicate.
What's your name? You got a name, don't you? Name. Namae.
And what's inevitably kind of tragic is that he just falls right back into stereotyping, basically saying stuff like this.
You don't know what I'm saying, do you? I don't know why you don't talk. You're angry. You're angry because they make you wear a dress.
And that's honestly kind of how it goes. Like, again, I don't care who you are, there's always going to be either rose-tinted or non-rose-tinted misconceptions about how Japan is in its entirety. You definitely have to try and intermingle and communicate on their level, but I still can't help but think that going into this for the first time, there are these misconceptions, and you will probably fall back on them. Oh man, and then we get to like the 43-minute mark, and this is where Katsumoto actually sits down and talks with Algren for the first time. And oh my god, I was getting such horrible flashbacks of experiences, because here's the thing. Katsumoto sits down with Nathan Algren and says this.
I will practice my English with you.
Now, during the entire time they're having this conversation, you're not really sure if Katsumoto is actually personally interested in Algren because of who he is, or because he's his enemy. I mean, he straight up says,
You kept me alive just to speak English?
Then what do you want?
To know my enemy.
but at the same time, he says stuff like this.
I'm honored to meet you.
Like, the whole time, Nathan Algren's running through his head, at least in nonverbal communication, like, what's your angle? Why are we talking? What is this all about? And Katsumoto's like, oh, I just want to have a good conversation. It's like, really? Do you really care? Or are you just trying to get information out of me? And here's why that kind of relates back. When you start to understand and get more comfortable with Japanese society and you go out and you want to try to make some friends, I can't think of a single foreigner that didn't go through this doubting process of, does this person in Japan want to talk to me because they're interested in me or because they're using me for something? And 9 times out of 10, it's English practice.
I will practice my English with you.
These kinds of people will typically only want to hang out with you because they want to practice their English. And it makes it really, really hard if someone's being genuine with you or not. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this video that this theme keeps coming up over and over again, and the big one hasn't even come up yet. But again, it's this idea of, because we wear our emotions and our wants and needs on our sleeves, it's kind of hard to tell whether or not we're being lied to or not. And I mean, what really doesn't help is that at the end of this conversation, Katsumoto says this in this particular kind of way.
I have enjoyed this conversation in English.
I have questions.
I have introduced myself. You have introduced yourself. This is a very good conversation.
And all I can think of is, man, the tatami is so freaking thick and obvious in this circumstance. And it wasn't necessarily a circumstance that was left on good terms either. And this is the point where most people who are trying to get into Japan will go with one of two paths. They're either going to take all these negative experiences that keep happening to them, and they're gonna stop, like they're gonna quit. They're just gonna go off and do something else. Or they're gonna knuckle under and take all of these bad experiences that have happened to them, the doubt of whether or not local people around me in Japan want to talk to me because they like me or because they want to practice English, or the non-communication that definitely does happen from time to time, or this idea of, oh god, why is everyone staring at me, that kind of thing. There will be people that knuckle under and keep pushing through despite those experiences. And in this movie, Algren is one of them. At the 44-minute mark, we actually see that he takes his shoes off before walking in. I mean, he could have just stayed bitter about that talk with Katsumoto and everything else that he's had to deal with up to this point and just done what he wanted, which is what a lot of foreigners do. But he didn't do that. He's trying to integrate. And that's what I mean when you have divergent people. You've got the people that just don't care anymore, or they're the people that still want to try and do their best and integrate. If you're trying to learn about Japan starting from scratch, you're going to come to that path at one point. And oh man, here's the big one. So at the 45-minute mark, this happens.
ご自分で言ったらどうです？でもせめてお風呂ぐらい。
And the backstabbing behind the smile begins. I don't know about you, but I like to personally think this is one of the biggest fears that we have as Gaijin going into Japan. We get so nervous and worried whether or not people are talking trash behind our back or not, because in our society that doesn't happen. Not usually. If it does happen, it's kind of looked down on. In Japan, it's kind of a regular thing. No one ever talks about it. It's like Simon Graham said, no one ever says what they really mean. And a lot of that is just to keep harmony going, but there's this massive paranoia that I feel like every Gaijin living in Japan feels. Even veterans will sometimes feel that someone's talking bad about them. And you're just not gonna know. Unless you are masterful at Japanese, you're just never gonna know. And it hurts. I mean, not just because we as Americans honor truth and honesty more than most other things, but it's just, come on, man. And then, you know, to make things worse, you've got Magojiro over here, who's just making this face at Nathan Algren the entire time. And you're not really sure if he's just playing with him or if he actively doesn't like him. But I will say this. This is one of the first instances, if not the first instance, where anyone from this village is actually being honest about their communication to Nathan. It's not spoken, but it is honest. So at the 47-minute mark, we've got this scene where you've got Higen and some other boy going out and basically sparring with Katana, and then Nobutada comes in and says, oh, well, these kids are actually pretty strong, why don't you try? And then Uchiro, who just rolls up and is like, put that sword down. And, you know, Nathan Algren being Nathan Algren completely refuses. And there's this long, like, 7-minute sequence of him just getting the crap beat out of him. But Nathan keeps coming back up, bringing up the sword, being all defiant and everything. Now, when I first saw this movie, I was like, is this social commentary about the tenacity of Americans and how we're really, really stubborn and we're not willing to give up on the things that we want to do? And maybe that is the case, but I think this is another one of those keep the outsiders outside kind of thing. Because why would Uchiro care? Like, I mean, Nobutada straight up said, give it a shot, you know, spar with this kid. But then you've got Uchiro who is like, no, put that down. I really do think that this is another instance of keeping foreigners out of Japan's, like, uchi, out of keeping them out of the inside of what it really means to be a part of Japan. And I know that I don't have a lot of evidence to prove this individual point right now, but give me a second because there's something that happens later on in the movie that might prove this point. But about 50 minutes in, there's this other big long conversation that happens between Alger and Katsumoto. And it's really interesting because this, again, you're not quite sure what Katsumoto's intention is here, but there's a lot more honesty to him. I mean, look at this scene as they're trying to open up and have this conversation.
Read a book.
I would rather have a good conversation
Why?
because we are both students of war. Huh?
Now, despite the fact that this conversation feels way more honest and way more personal, there is a personal interest between these two characters, there is still this concept of ideas and beliefs that are just running into each other. And there's no middle ground with it. I mean, let's look at the topic of General Custer, who gets brought up in this conversation.
1,000 Indians?
How many men for Custer?
200 no
I like this General Custer.
He was a murderer who fell in love with his own legend, and his troopers died for it.
I think this is a very good death,
Well, maybe you can have one just like it someday.
if it is my destiny.
Nathan Algren paints him as this horrible, horrible man who would sacrifice himself and basically Native Americans just to solidify his own legacy. Whereas Katsumoto looks at this guy who took just a small platoon of men against a huge amount of really, really angry Native Americans and lost horribly. This is an idea that Katsumoto actually kind of reveres because of this idea of, you know, dying in glorious battle and all that. So again, you've got two fundamental ideas, in this case, two fundamental ideas of war that are coming together and just absolutely clashing. This happens a lot. Just because the two of you can communicate doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to understand each other. Despite the fact that you can understand each other's words, either you are speaking more Japanese or they are speaking more English, you're always still going to be running into each other because you have different sociological philosophies. And that's honestly not something that I really paid attention to the first time I saw this movie, but looking back at it, having experienced these kinds of things, there are times today that even me and some of the friends that I have over in Japan will still kind of have a little conflict of interest because our cultures are so different, despite the fact that we are not only communicating with each other very well, but we're also friends. So this is kind of what I would consider the midpoint for someone who's like trying to learn Japanese and trying to integrate in society, or at least understand the society a little bit more. You just feel kind of beat down. And there's this point at like the 53-minute mark where Nathan Dahlgren's writing his journal and he says this about his circumstances.
1876. Day unknown. Month unknown. I continue to live among these unusual people. Mostly I'm treated with a kind of a mild neglect. As if I were a stray dog or an unwelcome guest.
This hit me so freaking hard. Like, remember before when I told you that if you're living in Japan, you give it about a month or two and then you start to figure out if people really like you or they just kind of don't want you around? That's what this feeling is. If there is someone who harbors grudges against foreigners in Japan, no one will really come out and just yell at you about it. Not really, not that often. But when you're working with someone or you're living near someone, like you're sharing a community space, this is exactly how it feels. You are a stray dog or an unwelcome guest. You are tolerated. You're not liked. People aren't inquisitive about you or anything like that. They're just having to deal with it. And when you start to realize that that's how some people in your community or your workplace are starting to see you, it can crush you mentally. But here's some other things that Nathan says.
Everyone is polite. Everyone smiles and bows. But beneath their courtesy, I detect a deep reservoir of feeling.
And this right here is something that I think can get lost when you as a foreigner are trying to integrate as much as you can in Japan. You might come to this point where you feel like nobody's honest, everyone's keeping everything from you, and that people just live lives, and it's like, no. When you really get into the Honne of people, you really do see this deep reservoir of feeling. There is actual humanity. Like, it can feel like it's not there. Like, I'm sorry, I'm speaking directly to those of you who are trying to go over to Japan. It may feel like that everyone is lying to you, but you'll find people where you can get past that. And you really do have this... It's such a good line, a deep reservoir of feeling. The Honne is so strong. There's so much passion, there's so much interest that people will have, and it's just, it's amazing once you can experience it. So not long after this, while Nathan's still doing his journal narration, he uses nonverbal communication to make Higan laugh. right before he's taken away by his mom Taka, and it's this small little gesture of communication, and the thing is, it's kind. Nathan's trying to make this kid laugh. This kid may not even like him all that much, but it's the little things. Like, there were so many times when I was living abroad where when I was struggling to communicate with someone, I would try to make a little gesture to kind of make them feel better about me being around them. Like, do y'all remember back, 10 years ago, the freaking Danjou meme? I'll put up a little clip here if you don't know what I'm talking about. But I just remember there were a couple of my kids who were just saying that because, kids and their memes these days. And so right before they ended the Jodan, 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 I would turn around and with them go Jodan Danjo with them. And there was a little bit of shock in the beginning, but then there was this big cheer and this big yeah. And I'm like, man, I feel like I made progress. So the one thing that I found, particularly as an American living over in Japan, these little gestures that are either barely vocal communication or nonverbal communication, these things will take you far. Don't neglect these. If you cannot communicate with the people that you're around, these little things, they're definitely super helpful for making them comfortable around you. So remember not that long ago when I talked about how Ujiro was basically trying to not just beat Nathan Algren down to make him drop that Boken? This is where I think there's a little bit of evidence. So at the 55-minute mark, Nathan's sitting there with another Boken, and Ujiro is very, very obviously apprehensive about it, but Katsumoto gives this little gesture, this little nod, no, teach him, show him, it's okay to. And then Ujiro just knocks the sword, not out of Nathan's hand, but just knocks the sword around and then gets in position. And then they do their quick little kata, and then at the end, he's just smack, smack, smack up on Nathan. And it's that's why I think that was another example of the keep the foreigners away from the Uchi, keep the foreigners away from the inside. In this case, keep Algren, keep this American warrior away from the concept of Budo, because Budo is so uniquely Japanese. So, I don't know, maybe I'm looking too hard into it, but I can't help but feel like this is a little bit of evidence of this continued theme. Oh man, and then we get to the 56-minute mark, and this is the first time that Nathan is actually wearing full kimono, full hakama, and he's a dork. Just watch. He's an absolute dork, and I love it. It's because, look, for those of you who have been to Japan or had the opportunity to try on traditional clothing, did you not feel like this? Be honest, did you not want to do something like this? I mean, the first time that I ever tried on samurai armor, I was doing all these poses and positioning. I had my friend with me. I was like, take all these pictures. Man, look, it's cringe, but it's so real. You know that whole meme, I'm cringe, but I'm free? Nothing exemplifies that more than this particular scene. And I mean, yeah, we'll get caught in this sort of bubbly fantasy feeling oh man, I feel, right? Look, I don't care. It's genuine excitement. And despite the fact that there may be people who make you feel bad for feeling that excitement, whether it's trying on samurai armor or wearing a kimono and hakama or even a yukata for the first time, don't be ashamed of that positive energy. Maybe not go around trying to karate chop things all over the place, but do not be afraid of that sort of passionate energy the first time you have it. And for those of you who are Japanese who are watching this, don't cringe too hard at these people. They're loving it so much. To any of my viewers who are Japanese watching this, be happy. It is such an exciting moment for foreigners who are in love with Japan, who finally get the opportunity to wear something. There's so much excitement. Just try not to see it as cringe. Just see it for the genuine love and excitement for something that it really is. And then there's this. At the 57-minute, 40-second mark, this happens.
Arigato. 僕は悪い？
タカ、おい聞いたか？もっと詳しやってくれ。サクエ、遠慮するな。小宮いくらでもある。
Nathan Algren finally starts using complete sentences with the correct context, and oh my god, Nobutada is so ecstatic. Taka not so much. We'll get to that later. Nobutaru's so freaking happy, and I cry. I cry every single time I see this. Like, I'm feeling it right now. There are so many times in Japan when you are trying so hard to integrate. Like, you know you're different. Everyone knows you're different. They don't expect you that you're gonna try to integrate, but when you do, oh my god, people's excitement is insane. There have been so many times living abroad where people would expect me to not know anything. And then I'll just throw a little something out there, whether it's a sentence. I joke, but there was a time when I was in the Kansai area, and I was just talking with this guy, and I just dropped a casual nandeanen. And, like, the jubilance in this person's face, seeing this foreigner who they didn't expect would know anything about Japan, let alone the Kansai area, just drop Kansai-bin, it was just complete elation. Like, maybe it's not the entirety of Tatemae, but it's like, Honne comes out so hard. Like, Nobutada, like, all of this, like, oh, like, Tatemae feelings of keep him out, whatever. He's so ecstatic. He's, like, trying to show him all these different things. And then freaking Magojiro, I told you, them kids, right? Magojiro, the youngest one, joins in with Nobutada in trying to interact with Nathan and teach him all these different words. At first, Nathan's like, what are these? And it's like, Hashi. And then Nathan's like, Hashi. And Nobutada's like, hi, Hashi. And he's so excited, I love it. And then all the while, like, Hingen's sitting over the corner. Hingen's one of the skeptical ones. He's like, how can he possibly understand? There are people in Japan that still do this that irritate me to no end, where it's like, someone's excited and happy that I'm actually trying to make an effort, and then these other people are like, he'll never understand. It's just a, it's a fluke. It's like, how could he possibly? But it's like, no, Magojiro and Nobutada are just so into it. Magojiro is like, hana, me. Nobutada is just grabbing everything. He's like, mage, like, chol mage, and then he grabs the rice bowls like, chan, and Nathan's like, slow down, I don't get it. That's the moment. That is the golden moment when you are trying to bridge, when you are trying to create a cultural bridge between the US or wherever you're from in Japan. This is the moment that you live for, and this is what makes me cry every single time I see it, because it's real and it's honest, because it's honest human heart. It's the human soul coming out and meeting each other and communicating, and there's so much excitement, and I could just go on about this for another hour, and I know I gotta get going, but I just love it. And it's at this point where the family lets Nathan in a little bit more, and I really do see this as symbol where the family is just more of like Japan in its own unique kind of way. Japan in the way that foreigners theoretically couldn't understand, that kind of thing. They let them in more. And man, I freaking told you, kids, man, you pay attention to the kids. You work on a relationship with them kids. Because at the hour mark, like, Nathan's teasing Higen with a whole bunch of more firewood that he can carry. And it's like, there's so much more interactivity now. And it's all with kids, not with adults. Not really. The adults still look down on him. And not more than a minute later, it's the kids. It's Magojiro and Higen who are helping Nathan trying to understand and use Japanese correctly.
Cold?
寒い
Samui? Samui? Fire.
火
Mueru. Mueru. To burn. Mueru.
燃える
Mueru.
It's not the adults. The adults are still looking down. When Nathan is going to do katana practice, to do kata practice, all the adults are still looking down on him like, he can't do it. But the kids, man, the kids believe in him. The kids invest time into helping him because they care. It's so real. But see, you have to kind of be careful in all this, because at the hour 1 minute 47 second mark, you actually see Nathan trying to help Taka carrying something in, and she's like, no, I got it, and he's like, no, I got it. And Taka says Japanese men don't help with this. Nathan Algren says, I am not Japanese, and continues carrying the pot over. I think this is a super romanticized idea, but I think that this kind of illustrates how we in the US, we're not so tied up in gender roles, and for the people that we care about and want to help, we will help them. It doesn't really necessarily matter what gender they are, how old they are, yada yada yada. We just kind of want to help. We want to help the people that we care about. And you have to be careful, everyone, because you cannot overstep your boundaries. Like, it might be a nice gesture, but I see this particular scene as a bit of a warning of don't overstep your boundaries, because those boundaries are still there. Don't get this idea that you can just kind of do what you think is being helpful, because you need to the idea is to integrate, not dominate, and this is kind of a little bit of a domination. But that being said, that doesn't mean that you should just hide everything away. I mean, a couple minutes later, we've got a scene of Nathan Alger teaching all these kids, trying to teach them how to play baseball. And the kids don't get it, and it just turns into this chase game, and everyone's having a good time. And it's like, again, this is real. Like, when I was teaching abroad, I remember there was this big snow day, and it was after school. I remember some of the girls were out, and they were trying to make a snowman. And you know how Japanese snowmen are like 2 balls big, and like Western snowmen are 3 balls big. It was just such a big deal to me that I had this opportunity to teach a couple of my gals, you know, the difference between 2-ball snowmen and 3-ball snowmen, and why we had 3-ball snowmen. And it's just little things. It's such a little bonding thing, and it was great. And it's just, this one little scene, it's so real. And then literally 30 seconds after that, we've got Nathan and Ujiro and all the samurai together, and they're still sparring, they're still practicing their kata, and all the adults still don't think that Nathan can possibly understand or possibly have the skill to beat Ujiro, right? Like, they're actually betting. But they're not betting on who wins or loses, they're actually betting on how fast Nathan will lose. But you know, the funny thing is that, yeah, there's like 2 or 3 times where that happens, but by the end of it, they actually end in a draw, and everyone is really, really surprised and really, really shocked. And it's like, I can't help but think, when it comes to this movie, the whole concept of Budo, of kata sparring and things like that, that is, again, going back to what I was saying before, it's symbolic of the Japanese inside, right? You know, the concept of Budo, it's so uniquely Japanese, and how in the world could this Western warrior have any idea of what it's like? But the thing is, throughout the entirety of this movie, you see Nathan keep trying and trying and trying. He's getting the crap beaten out of him this entire movie when he's trying to do this kata. But for the first time, he lets go of the too many mind. Man, that's something I wish I could talk about in another video. He lets go of the too many mind, and he actually does it. He doesn't beat Ujiro, but he actually ties with him. And this surprises everyone. And I think this is kind of the end game when it comes to cross-cultural communication, not only verbally, but understanding things like unspoken rules and just understanding and trying to integrate within Japan's society a little bit more. This is symbolic of that. And I believe this to be true because this still happens to me all the time. All the freaking time. When I'm interacting with some of my Japanese friends, or when I'm over in Japan and we're just doing stuff, there always comes up this conversation of all the things that I know, all the things that I've learned, all the things that I can do. And when I show or tell friends in Japan or people I'm talking to and getting to know in Japan, when I show them or tell them this, there's this weird disbelief in their eye. And 9 times out of 10, they ask me, why do you know this? Or why do you do this? And the bottom line is because I care to know. I want to know. And that is what all of this is. That is what is symbolic, in my opinion. That is what Nathan Alger learning kata and how to fight with katana, that's the symbol of that. He cares. He's interested, he cares. He's gotten beat up over it. He's had to deal with mistake after mistake after mistake. And not just necessarily in you know, kendo or kenjutsu, but with just life. He's made so many mistakes before, he's had so many bad experiences, but he kind of kept going. That's why this movie speaks to me on a personal level when it comes to interaction between Americans and Japanese, particularly with a big focus on Americans trying to understand Japan so much more and mesh. This is a moment of meshing. I still say to this day that the best compliment that someone from Japan can give you is Nihonshin mitai, or something along those lines, like, man, are you Japanese? Because then you feel integrated. Like, you're finally getting a bit of gratification for what you're trying to put into, you know? And it just means the world. But please, by all means, even if you watch this movie and you're like, this is such weeb hot garbage, watch this movie again within this context, and man, it'll hit you something different. So anyway, thank you so much everyone for watching. I am so happy to be back. I cannot wait to make more videos. I've got a whole list of ideas that I want to get out there. But until next time everyone, this is Gaijin, signing out.